Well, this is section 2 from 6 in our study of Ruth. And this is Ruth chapter 1. And after experiencing personal tragedy, Naomi returns to her homeland with Ruth, her devoted daughter-in-law, and it was a devastating personal tragedy. Her husband, Elimelech, had died. Also her sons Mahlon and Chilion had also died. The two sons were married to Ruth and to Orpah, who were Moabite women. The book of Ruth is full of contrasts, and this opening chapter is no exception. For example, we have the despair of bereavement. It contrasts with the comfort of loyal friendship, or the recognition that the Lord brings difficulties, contrasts with the belief that he shows kindness. The leaving of homeland, first by Naomi and then by Ruth, contrasts with Naomi's return to her homeland. These contrasts set the scene for the story as it unfolds. The contrasts focus on the dire personal circumstances which the ordinary family faces. Even so, we can see that the lives of the family members are in the Lord's hands. This is shown by the leaving is replaced by the hope in returning. The famine is replaced by the beginning of the barley harvest. And the void of bereavements is filled by a new depth of relationship between Ruth and Naomi. In the first chapter, verses 1 to 5, they set a tragic scene. Naomi finds herself in a foreign and potentially hostile place. She is widowed and then further bereaved by the death of her two sons. We really cannot miss the devastating nature of her losses. It seems that within a period of 10 years, Naomi's complete immediate family are taken away from her. In Old Testament times, a widow's position was thought of in the same way as that of orphans and foreigners, as widows were insecure and vulnerable. While in Moab, Naomi was of course a foreigner too. She was without provision, protection, and prospects. It's not surprising that she felt keenly the bitter pain of her experiences, as we read in verses 20 to 21. Let me read those for you. "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." But Naomi is also a woman of faith, and the writer makes this point strongly. Naomi is alert to the Lord's work in her life and homeland. For example, we read, she heard that the Lord had come to the aid of his people, and she acts on this knowledge by preparing to return to Bethlehem. And we have that in verses 6 and 7. And then verses 8 and 9, she prays for her two daughters-in-law. She wants their future to be marked by God's kindness and human kindness in the shape of new husbands. And I'll say it again. She wants their future to be marked by God's kindness and human kindness, and the human kindness to come in the shape of new husbands. There is something remarkably unselfish and trusting about Naomi's words. She is concerned with Ruth and Orpah's welfare, not her own. She expresses confidence that the God of kindness would reward the kindness of her daughters-in-law by his blessing. Of course, the irony is that as Naomi expresses her own kindness to Ruth and Orpah, she herself journeys into God's rewarding kindness, which will come across again in its fullest expression in chapter 4. But Ruth is determined to stay with Naomi. This is perhaps a mark of the love and respect that Naomi had earned from her daughter-in-law. Orpah heads back to her family house in Moab, where she hopes to be provided for and to find another husband. You may be interested to know that in Moab they worship the god Chemosh. But this god actually appears to be the god of the Amorites as well, because in Judges, that's the book just before Ruth, in chapter 11 verses 23 to 24, we read, "Now since the Lord, the God of Israel, has driven the Amorites out before his people Israel, what right have you to take it over? Will you not take what your god Chemosh gives you? Likewise, whatever the Lord our God has given us, we will possess." So Ruth makes the decision to go back with Naomi and follow the God Naomi worships. So they head back to Bethlehem, just when the barley harvest was beginning. Now this would have lasted about 2 months, and of course they didn't use the farm machinery we see on our farms today. It would have all been done by hand. Back in Bethlehem, as Naomi shares her family news with the woman, realism and faith combine. Verses 20 and 21 are littered with graphic words of suffering. For example, bitter, empty, afflicted, misfortune. Naomi does not play down the reality of her own pain, but it's interesting that she uses the name Shaddai, Almighty, for God. It's a really interesting name, Shaddai. This suggests that she recognizes that though God is responsible for her disasters, he is still in charge of her life. The name Shaddai is often used in connection with God's powerful hand of deliverance or judgment. It expresses belief that God's work is beyond human scrutiny and explanation, and Naomi seems to accept this. You know, there's a wonderful hymn titled El Shaddai. Perhaps we'll try that in church sometime. So in this first chapter, Naomi's character is carefully described to us. She has not collapsed under her painful experiences. Her resolve is secure and her faith remains intact. In this sense, her adversity has shown us, and her, what she is made of. But it has also introduced her afresh to God. Thank you.